Thank you. I'm here on behalf of Joan Carling of the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact. My name is Roberto Borrero. I represent the International Indian Treaty Council, also of the Indigenous Peoples Major Group. The SDGs and the Post-2015 agenda aspire to leave no one behind. Yet at this critical juncture in the process, it's in jeopardy of excluding Indigenous peoples from the agenda, even as traditional territories of Indigenous peoples encompass up to 22% of the world's land surface and coincide with 80% of the world's biodiversity. Co-facilitators have asked what elements must be considered in the development of indicators and targets. Well, from the Indigenous perspective, the post-2015 development agenda seems well poised to repeat the broken promises of the MDGs to the world's Indigenous peoples by promoting universality at the expense of diversity and our rights. This trend is manifested in the recent Statistical Commission's technical report on an indicator framework. While only 2 targets specifically reference Indigenous peoples, the Commission's report embraces the use of the term vulnerable groups or marginalized groups without clearly identifying who these groups are or acknowledging that these terms fail to recognize the distinct cultural identities and political status of Indigenous peoples who are rights holders and agents of change. Additionally, we're concerned that at the national level, some states may reuse or refuse to include targets and indicators relating to Indigenous peoples, including the need for disaggregated data based on ethnicity and Indigenous status on the grounds that Indigenous peoples are not legally recognized. With this in mind, monitoring framework should emphasize the inclusion of targets and indicators on Indigenous peoples regardless of their national status. As the Statistical Commission seeks to take into account conceptual indicator frameworks, we acknowledge the proposal of the SDG-N for an integrated monitoring framework with multi-level review processes and indicators. We strongly recommend, however, that any monitoring framework commit to the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples in furthering developing targets and indicators to ensure inclusiveness, addressing our specific circumstances and conditions. In addition, we recommend that the Commission endorsed interagency expert group on SDG indicators and the HLG include the participation of major groups and other stakeholders in an open and transparent manner. In closing, we strongly recommend the disaggregated data on ethnicity and Indigenous status to be included in all relevant indicators for Indigenous peoples across all the 17 goals and targets with the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples in identifying such relevant indicators. To this end, we've prepared a policy brief containing our specific proposals for targets and indicators in line with the commitments of states in relation to the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples and the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. A link to this policy brief will be included as an annex in this statement. Finally, for Indigenous peoples, the aspiration of the post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals of leaving no one behind means the full respect, recognition, and fulfillment of our collective rights. These are not privileges or special rights, but will ensure equality and non-discrimination and accord us with our dignity, well-being, and self-determined development. We expect nothing less than that if this is UN is really indeed our home. Thank you.